Today, we're going to talk to you about the third toxic team killer, defensiveness. Defensiveness is when you start explaining or over-explaining and disagreeing simply to avoid criticism.
So we're going to give you an example from our book, The Beauty of Conflict, Harnessing Your Team's Competitive Advantage. We were facilitating a client offsite, their monthly strategic meeting. And the head of marketing was on deck to give his new market strategy. He started his presentation, this was Paul, and shortly into it, Sam, the CFO, said, I don't agree with those numbers. And before Paul could respond, Mary, head of sales, chimed in and said, well, I don't care about the numbers, but I disagree with your conclusions. Needless to say, you could see the energy rising in Paul. And he said, listen, my team worked months on this presentation. We're the experts. I don't want to hear it. And Sam was just like, well, don't get so defensive, Paul. You kind of know what happened next, right? Paul said, I'm not getting defensive. Can't you relate?
Needless to say, this is when we interjected. And the first thing was, I spoke to Paul and said, hey, Paul, I might agree with Sam that you seemed defensive, but I don't actually know what was going on. I'm imagining you were expecting something different to happen when you brought this presentation in. And I'm curious, what is happening for you right now? And Sam took a deep breath and he's like, Paul took a deep breath and said, you are right. I can't believe they jumped on it even before I even finished. And all I heard was their criticism. And I said, well, no wonder then you got so upset. And I wonder what you were expecting at that point and would be interested in hearing more about that.
So when you're on the receiving end of defensiveness, somebody else you think is being defensive, doing what Susan did by reflecting back what you think the person is saying and also their emotional tone, and then letting them respond, because that gives them a chance to actually feel heard. And then giving a sense of empathy, like, well, no wonder if you wanted something different and you got this, you'd be upset. So that's what you can do when you're on the receiving end of somebody being defensive.
Now, if you happen to be in the situation Paul was in and you begin to notice you're getting defensive, it's possible if you could do something a little earlier, even name it, like, wow, I am beginning to feel defensive. I haven't even finished my presentation and I think you're already jumping on me and telling me it isn't going well. And so I'm backed up and I want to hear your feedback, but I can't hear it if I'm in that situation. You can imagine that would have been a bit different if Paul had been able to catch that earlier on.
So in both instances, when defensiveness is in the room, the first action is the same. Reflect back what you're hearing, whether you're the person feeling defensive or you're seeing it, because what that does is it gives the person time to just settle their nervous system and get their brain back online. So on either case, that's your first plan of intervention that really helps. And imagine if your team could deal with defensive more effectively. You'd have better conversations and get to what's really underneath.
All right, thank you. And we'll be telling you about the last of the toxic team killers next week.